Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome Daz Studio tutorial. In this one I'm going to give you some pro tips to get more decent portraits out of your characters. There's a lot of tutorials out there that cover things like lighting and render settings and so on and so forth, but ultimately what you really need to know is the fundamental basics of taking a really good portrait of a person. But I'm not going to badmouth other creators. I'm simply going to give you my top tips on how to get the best out of a character portrait. So as you can see in my scene, what we've got here is Lucy. I've already posed her and given her an expression. So ultimately in this tutorial, the pose isn't really that important. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about composition and camera angle. Now at the moment you can see I've got my render settings set kind of wacky, vertical. So I'm going to change those now, and I'm going to go back to 16 by 9. No, that's not 9. Come on, in here, 16 by 9. And then I'm going to put that in 1920 by 1080 so that it's HD resolution. So as you can see, that's changed the dynamic of the image already a little bit because now we have a different composition. So this is going to be a kind of a head and shoulders cropped portrait. So what we need to do is get ourselves into position. The first top tip I'm going to give you is where the height of the position of the camera. So as you can see, when we click on this, we come down to here. But this is just a perspective view. So what we need to do is we need to create a camera by clicking on the camera icon on the top left hand side and going Apply, Active, Viewport, Transforms. The first tip is to be as far away as you can be with your camera. So in the case of Daz Studio, you can go a very, very long way away because you're not restricted by the focal length of the lenses in your kit. So we're going to go good distance away, and then we're going to come into our camera properties and we're going to zoom all the way in. So I'm going to go to here, head and shoulders kind of crop is going to be about there. So as you can see, we're at nearly 600 millimeters focal length, which is, crazy really, but you'd certainly never take a portrait at that focal length in real life, but we're in fantasy land, so we can. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is the vertical position of the camera. If we look at the camera at the moment, it's at 91 centimeters. Now most people's go-to thing to do when they're doing a headshot is to just do this, put the camera at the same height as the character, and then take the shot from there. But what I would say is that don't do that. Now Lucy's about 1.8 meters tall, thereabouts, maybe slightly shorter than that, but she's on tiptoe, so we'll say 1.8. Now we want to be shooting in order to get a really flattering shot from just above belly button height. So actually 120 centimeters is ideal, and then we can rotate the camera up using the X rotate until we've got the position that we want. I tend to crop the top of the heads off so that the eyes are in a better position, but there's nobody forcing you to do that. If you don't want to, you can keep the top of the head in, and then if you wanted to use the rule of thirds to your advantage, you could just simply slide her across so that she's on what we would call the golden ratio, the center of her face, or the leading eye, which is this one, because this one is. So before I go any further, I'll explain the reasoning for the camera being so far away. Let's say we go back into a perspective view, and we're going to come right in close, and we're going to create another camera here, and we're going to look through that camera. Now let's say this is kind of going to an extreme, but this illustrates the point quite well. And now if I'm this close, I need to pull my focal length out to get her in. Now you can see what's happened there. That is weird. That's really distorting the bit with the neck where the center of focus is fine, but everything else is hugely stretched. Now obviously the further away you get, the less that distortion gets, but generally speaking, photographers like to take portraits between, I would say, no nearer than 50 mil, and they generally don't go much further away than 200 mil to do headshot portraits. But we've been allowed to go a lot further because we're not restricted by the focal lengths of the lenses in our kit. So the reason we get so far away is to make the proportions of the character look as normal as possible. So we come back here and you can see how much of a difference there is between the proportions in that camera, the one that's really far away and the one that's close. You can see that because we're much closer, it looks like she's sticking her chest out, pointing her breast towards the camera a lot more, and it looks like she's sticking her neck forward a lot more. Whereas if we come back to our other camera, you can see that it looks like a bit more of a natural pose. There's no sort of strange stretching and pushing going on there. So we'll delete that nearer camera. So we've got our camera in position. We've got it more or less composed how we want it, with the camera's head and face at roughly a third across the frame. So now we need to go on to the next tip, which is going to mean going back into perspective view again. And we're going to talk about depth of field. Now, depth of field is something that a lot of people use really badly in Daz Studio, because they're either trying to achieve an effect that they're not entirely sure how to achieve, or whatever the reason is. But I'm going to show you the best way. When you're doing portraits, you should always be focused on the eyes. That means that when we turn our depth of field on, our focal distance, this dot, should be perfectly in line with the character's eyes. Now, we're not in the perfect position to do this. We need to come round this way a little bit more and then drag it across. It's a little bit difficult to see from this side, so I'm going to whiz round to the other side where we can actually see where her eyes are. There you go. So now we can see that from the side view, her eyes are almost perfectly in line, but I'm going to come back a little bit more and make sure that this is absolutely perfect. So we're dead center, pretty much perfectly on our eyeballs at this point. And we've got a very shallow depth of field. We're at at this focal distance, f22 is a very shallow focal distance, but obviously if you were nearer, you'd go down to something like f4, f2.8, whatever. So we've got a nice shallow depth of field there. So when we come back to our camera view, it doesn't make any difference because we're not in iRay render mode, but when we put this into iRay render, we will see the shallow depth of field that creates depth. So I'm going to quickly go into my render settings. I'm going to go to environment. I'm just going to make sure that draw dome is on because I'm using an HDRI image, so we don't want her to just be on this black background in the render. So the next tip is eye contact. Now actually the portrait that we've got going on here at the moment is actually pretty good. She's looking off to the side, which is not a bad thing to do in portraits, but for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to make sure that she's looking at the camera. Now, a lot of people will go straight into posing. They'll go into the head and they'll move the eyes together by using left, right, up and down, which is not necessarily wrong, but it's much safer to make sure that the eye contact is definitely happening with the person looking at the camera. If you come in and you select the eye like so, come in and you see it's opened up the head and you can see left and right eye there, and we go to the top of the parameters tab and we click on the point at and we just select camera 1, and then we do the same for the left eye, and as you can see that's changed the dynamic of the portrait already, because now it looks like it's a more determined kind of expression. She's not looking off to the side or mystically. Now she's giving us a dead look straight down the lens. Now if we go into iRay render mode, it'll give it a few seconds to have a think about what it wants to do. And as you can see, we've got a pretty good portrait going on there. The framing's good. The depth of field is shallow enough that it's made it look quite nice, and she's given us a nice solid bit of eye contact. And that's one thing that we can do. Now if I wanted to change this slightly, say I wasn't happy with the crop, I wanted to get closer in on her face, we'd come back out of iRay render mode before we do anything else, and we're going to just minimize Lucy's tab. We're going to close that up like this, and we're going to go back to our camera, and I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit more. Now, as you notice, I haven't actually really got any plans to. I'm going to just do this by eye, and then you can see what's going on. I've moved her to the other side of the frame because of the way the shoulders are slanted to one side. This side just looks a little bit more open to me, and then I'm going to rotate the camera ever so slightly upwards. That's quite difficult to do this from this focal distance because the tiniest little adjustment will make a huge difference. As you can see, that's 30 degrees. No, we want 3. There we go. So you'll have to sort of stop using the sliders and start using actual values when it gets to this kind of point. Now what we've done is we've zoomed in and we've moved, so we're going to have to go back and check our depth of field is still sound. So I'm going to come in much closer and I'm going to just look at this, because as you can see now the depth of field has become really shallow. So I'm going to change the focal distance just a smidge, literally a fraction. It may go too far, yeah, so what we'll have to do is just see what the two values are. So I think it's going to be 261.8. No, that's wrong. Silly me. Let's go back to undo. 761. No, that's still too close, so let's go 762. As you can see, it's really finite, but as you can see, it's bang on her eyeball now. It's exactly where we need it to be, so we'll come back to camera 1 and we'll come back into iRay mode, like so. And as you can see, the depth of field is much shallower now, but it's really given as a focus, a hard focus on those eyes and the lips to a certain extent as well. And it's sort of, in my humble opinion, I think we could probably get away with going up to, at this, it's going to be 40 maybe, just to give us a little bit more. There we go. Let's just sharpen up the eyebrows and the edge of the face a little bit more, like so. So remember these top tips: the camera position, the eye contact, the composition, the position of the person's head in the frame. They make all the difference when taking portraits. You can have the best posing and the best expressions and the best lighting in the world, but if you're not taking the picture from the right angle, the right distance away, the right focal length, the right focal distance, all of these things go to making a portrait look more effective and making them stand out from everybody else's. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, give us a thumbs up, a subscribe, click on that bell thing. I don't really know what it does, but click on it anyway, and stay up to date with these videos. I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.